Ashe family, welcome back to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective. This is the podcast where we give our point of view of controversial topics from my experience, Black history, and non-knowledge as African Americans. Black history presently lives in us so we can continue to excel into the future. It's one thing to know Black history. It's another thing to take advantage of what the people in Black history did for you. I am your host, Martre Baker Stevens, and to the right of me is Shaquan Battle.
Yeah.
And to the right of him is Jerome Battle.
What's up?
We appreciate all the love and support we've been getting on Facebook. Even you racist people, thank y'all for making the numbers go up. I really do appreciate y'all. How are y'all?
I'm good.
I'm good. So I was thinking about something today, and I remember in middle school, Black people would say me and Big was spoiled. And I'm like, I don't know how we spoiled. Our parents get up every day and go to work just like other people's parents. Fast forward. Do you think some racist people think white privilege don't exist, that they just get up and work hard? And that's why they say...
Yeah, I think most white people think white privilege doesn't exist. Why? Because it's something. So let me touch this. That was actually a good thought, and here's why. White people think for them to be privileged, that it has to be something that's told to them, or something that's taught directly. In other words, son, I want you to go to school and understand that you're better than all those Black kids. All right, that's not the conversation. That's not how this works. The privilege is something that they get just because their skin is white. Mm-hmm. Okay. The practice of the privilege is where it becomes a little more intimate, right? And what I mean by that is, on most occasions, if a white person applies for a loan at an establishment that most of the people that work at the bank are going to be white, they have a privilege. Now, I'm not saying they go into the situation thinking that,
right.
But for them to assume otherwise, I would think and I'm not going to speak for white people. I'm going to backtrack just for a second. I'm going to speak for Black people. When I go into a bank and most of the people on the other side of the counter are white, I'm always worried about whether I'm going to get the benefit of the doubt or not, right? Because I'm Black, not because of my financial situation, not because of my debt to income ratio, right? Not because of any of that, but simply because I'm Black. I feel that it might be a problem where I don't think white people entertain that thought at all when they go into those situations.
Right.
That's the privilege.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the privilege. So it's not taught. It's something that has been handed to them their entire lives, whether they understood it at the time or not. Unlike us, we're not handed those things. Whenever we got an expensive pair of sneakers, our parents let us hear about how many fucking hours they had to work to buy you those sneakers and why you had to have at least two pairs. One you wear to school and then one you come home and put on when you get home from school, right? I don't know that those are things that white people typically think about on a day-to-day basis. And we're only looking at it on the scale of me going to get a loan. I actually look like it on the scale every day, even if I'm going to get gas or if I'm going to a restaurant. Or I'll be honest with you, there's times you go into an establishment that is white people that's working. It's probably even owned by white people. And sometimes I feel like that I'm not given the same level of attention that a white person gets that's in the store. If I'm next up, they may go do something else first before they wait on me.
Right.
Like pick a piece of lint off of the back of their jacket that's hanging on the chair, which actually happened. Yeah. That was more important than waiting on me at the time. They chose to do that and then come wait on me. So of course I asked the question. The people before me, that piece of lint was there. You didn't remove it. It got to me. It felt like an ideal time to fucking move it, right? Is it because I'm Black? And he said, oh, no, it's not because you're Black. Did you notice I was Black? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you noticed that at what point? I don't understand the question. Of course you don't understand the question because yes, You did not feel like it was important to give me your full attention at the time that it was time for me to pay. Mm-hmm. Because of course I'm just not going to walk out of the store with the merchandise, right? Yeah. That's what you would like for me to do. So you can call the cops then. So it's something that I think that Black people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of different aspects that white people don't have to think about. That's the privilege.
For sure.
I'll say this, Bacon, then you can go. All the times that I went to get a loan, the person that I was going to see was white. And I felt like when I went in there, I was inconveniencing them.
I'll give a couple examples, because one of the things that you normally see if an unarmed Black man is killed or after he has an encounter with the police, one of the first things that people say, if he would have just cooperated, then this wouldn't have happened. And that's one of the things that white people say, because when they encounter the police, cooperation usually leads to a safe environment. Mm-hmm. Even if they don't cooperate, we've seen videos where a white man attacked police officers with a knife and they not once fire their weapons. Mm-hmm. We've seen when white people get pulled over, they get irate and jump out the car before the police officer even get up there. We don't get that level of safetyness in our environment whenever Black people are pulled over, right? Even if you have done nothing wrong, even if you haven't broken any laws, even if you do cooperate, there's still a level of danger that we encounter. When you just said that, the first example that came to my head was from the movie Remember the Titans, where Blue and Sunshine tries to get Blue to go into a white restaurant. Right. And Blue like, yo, I can't go in. They like, no, it's fine. Come on in. And then when they get in there, he realized that he's not welcome. And Blue gets upset because he realized that Sunshine doesn't understand that he has white privilege. Mm-hmm. You have the privilege to go in there. I don't. You don't understand what it's like in my world where you at now, because I believe Sunshine was from California. He really didn't understand the magnitude of what he was dealing with in racist Virginia. And that's just one of the things. So a lot of them aren't aware of it. They just think that everything is equal opportunity. And a lot of that is our fault, because when we did integration, we did it by numbers, right? We got Blacks and whites together. This is the I have a dream. This is the dream right here. It. But in reality, when you go into those schools and you see the systematic way that things are being taught, you see the systematic way that white people look at things and the way that Black people look at things, you realize that that's not true. Even going back to the Florida curriculum. So you had African Americans who came up with a curriculum, and you decided the white people decided this isn't what should be taught in schools. Right. So DeSantis scraps that, creates his own task force, has a African American author rewrite another one. And we disagree with the portion of that. But instead of scrapping it like you did the last one, you go along with it. The people on the task force said they haven't even seen the curriculum. And then the person that you use to write the curriculum, if you Google his name, it's literally going to say an African-American conservative. That's exactly what it's going to say. It's a political agenda when it comes to it. That is white privilege, that I can teach what I want to teach, and I can take out what I want to take out, because the white is always going to be the majority, whether it's in the Senate, whether it's in political seats, whether it's with the voting. They're always going to be the majority to control whatever happens. And that's where white privilege comes in.
Absolutely. Welcome, folks.
First time listeners and last time listeners. There was something I want to get your perspective on this. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but I just want to give your perspective on this because I wasn't even going to talk about it. But until this morning, I seen a clip of the interview with Ice Cube, with Tucker Carlson, and brother Ice Cube. And I don't disagree with everything that Ice Cube said or what he's trying to do, but bruh, blink twice if you need help. Like, have you watched the interview?
I watched part of it. I didn't see the whole thing.
It looked like that brother was coerced. Like, I know we just seen the movie, they cloned Tyrone. It looked like Ice Cube going through something. It almost looked like he was uncomfortable in that situation. Like he was just going along with the interview to not say what he truly believed. Like, did you get that feel?
No, and I'll tell you why. If anybody knows Ice Cube, his history, his work, right? Ice Cube is going to say what he wants to say, right? I think for Ice Cube, he's hesitant to say certain things because of how he's been treated, not by white America, but by black America.
Right.
Because sometimes he says things that black people don't necessarily understand, nor do they take the time to try to understand it. Now, I'm just go off script just for a second. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to go back. Kanye West is the one who does this all the time. He will say things, but he may not give you specifics about what he's saying, no details. And people just assume that this is what he means, right? And then he has to come back and they call it clarify. But what he's really doing is giving you more information. So one point when Kanye West says something about slavery, at some point it looks like that it's a choice. So now Kanye West is no idiot. He knows that black people didn't have a choice in slavery. What he's saying though is if you listen to everything that he said in that segment, he was saying with the number of blacks, we outnumber most plantation white people, whether it was the slave owners or relatives of the slave owners or white people who lived on the plantation who also worked on the plantation as well. At most points, blacks outnumber them, yet they did not revolt.
Can I just interject quickly because I just did a video on this? That's inaccurate because there are many rebellions and revolts that happen on the plantation. Most of the time people don't talk about it, but there's many that happen. Like I think the narrative is that black people became Christians, sung songs, and then waited for their freedom. That's not true.
But just talking in general.
Okay, go ahead.
In general, if you have, because most plantations, this is documented, most plantations had 30 or more slaves at any given moment. Yet the household only held 5 or 6 adults. Right. We're not even talking about the kids. 5 or 6 adults. So obviously they're outnumbered in that situation. But even though revolts did happen, he's saying the revolt should have happened every day on every plantation until we were free.
That's true.
Right? That's what he's saying in a general sense. So, and we know that it wasn't because we didn't want to be free and it wasn't a choice. It was because of the risk factor. And I don't think people take in consideration the risk factor, the fact that we weren't educated. They kept us separate. It was unable for us to communicate the way. All these things play a part in the why nots, not necessarily a choice like Kanye West may have been saying, but he's just saying in general. So back to Ice Cube. Okay. Some of the things that Ice Cube talk about are not things that's going to impact the average black person. So let's just say we'll just use the way that they classify people in terms of taxes. People will make less than $250,000 a year in a separate tax class. And you can break that down into 3 different groups: working class, poor, or unemployed. People who use social systems, right? Or you can look at the people that make $250,000 or more: the working class, the moderate, the rich, the wealthy, right? So when Ice Cube's talking, he's not talking from the perspective of an 18-year-old living in Compton in 1991. Okay? That's not the perspective he's speaking from now. And it's really hard to incorporate all facets of Black America when you have these conversations. Because you mentioned something that was very important in I don't know if it was the last episode or the one before that, in terms of how you are to vote. Do you vote on things that are going to impact you and your family only, or the Black community? Because they could be separate sides of the spectrum. So from Ice Cube's perspective, he's a person who's from a family, because everybody in his family is benefiting from what he's doing. So he has nobody outside of his family that's in the $250,000 less bracket, right? So when he's talking about, it's just talking specific, taxes, he's speaking from somebody who wants to protect his interests, right? We know that what Democrats typically do when they're in the White House is that they increase social program funding. The only way to pay for that is through taxes. And they typically tax people more who make $250,000 a year or more. So his perspective is totally different than little Leroy's that live down on 14th Street. It's going to be different.
I'll propose this question to you because I want you to answer this. Do you see a problem with that?
I do. The reason I say that is because Ice Cube, though he can't speak to what the 14-year-old is going through because he makes more money, but he can still remember being that 14-year-old and how it was growing up in the areas that he's from.
That's exactly my point, and I'm glad you answered that way because I'm reading a book, and I wasn't even going to talk about this, but I'm reading a book right now. It's actually based on, and the book went totally different than when I actually bought the book for because I want to talk about it on this podcast. The book is about the elite class out of DC during the Reconstruction period, where members of the Black community in Washington, DC became, they started working in the state capitol building, like the library. They started gaining land. They started becoming real estate agents. And there was a portion that were extremely wealthy to the point where they were having dinner parties where the president was coming. You know what I'm saying? They were doing very well for themselves. A lot of them prominent members of the church and trying to do all of these things. But in the book, it talks about how the rest of the people in DC looked at them with hatred because they looked at them with hatred. And because instead of pulling your hand down, trying to help other people come up, you want to keep your society small with elitism. And it brought me to the question of classism within our own race, because we see so many, not even just entertainers, but we see a lot of entertainers get rich and then they never go back to their community and help the community where they came from. We even see this with some of our prominent political people who speak for Black community and are not in the Black community who drive Jaguars. We see this in the church where people get money and drive these luxurious cars and have these luxurious homes. Meanwhile, the people of the community are giving you money to make you rich. We see this all the time when it comes to classism within our community. And the problem that I had with this as it came to classism was the one question that Tucker Carlson asked him. And he said, do you have racial conflict in your life day to day? And Ice Cube said, no, because I'm Ice Cube. He said, most of the time, police know who I am and white people know who I am, that they give me a pass. But he said, my family members that still live in LA, they don't get that. And then he went on talking about the problems that Ice Cube has. So even in the interview, he constantly talked about the people who keep vote Democrat. And we know who he was talking about. He was talking about the Black community, which I don't disagree with them. They should be able to earn our vote. But the problem is, you know that you're attempting to speak for the Black community, but yet it continues to come back to just being about Ice Cube.
Well, see, part of it is I think you can't, when you listen to Ice Cube in any interview, you can't just listen to what he's saying in that interview. He has a body of work, and we're just talking about from the interview perspective. So he's also talking about the fact that when you talk about Democrats earning their vote, we don't make Democrats earn the Black community's vote. Black people just vote Democrat because that's what they do. That's what they were taught to do. And he's saying, cool, you can vote Democrat, but still make them earn the vote. What plan? And I will go back to the election, Biden's election, we'll even go back further. We'll go back to when Donald Trump won presidency the first time. Ice Cube wanted to meet with Donald Trump, and he did. I believe he did. I think a few people did, including Steve Harvey. But he also wanted to meet with the Black candidate, the Democratic candidate as well. And he wanted to know one thing. What is your plan for Black people? That was the one question that Ice Cube asked. The question doesn't change just because you're a Democrat, and that historically you pass things that typically help Black people. But the question doesn't change. What is your plan? Joe Biden didn't have one. So in retrospect to what he's saying, I'm not saying that I agree with him 100%. I'm saying I understand.
I do too. I understand too.
Just because you typically do things to help the Black community, or that you're black yourself,
Mm-hmm.
don't mean that I shouldn't ask you the question, what do you have in plan for me? What do you have in store? What's your plan for black people? Because if you don't have a plan for us, you know, my dad used to say this all the time. If you don't have a plan to succeed, then you have a plan to fail. So that means that without a plan in place that you can communicate to me that I can understand, that means you don't have a plan for me.
Yeah, but in the interview, he didn't come across. He didn't ask anything. He didn't ask Tucker Carlson about the Republican Party of what are they going to do for black people. Now, I don't disagree with him, because we do know Joe Biden didn't sit down with Ice Cube. He went and sat down with Cardi B, and Cardi B had no idea what the hell he was talking about.
That's right.
So I understand it from that perspective. It's just the timing is bad, because we know he was talking about, I'm going around and I'm going to talk about the gatekeepers because my league isn't coming off. And then you go over to Tucker Carlson. And if I see sums of money going to that league, I know where it's coming from. You know what I'm saying?
I think you just hit the nail on the head. And this is the part that everybody has to learn to understand. Yes, Ice Cube's black. At the end of the day, he's going to be a black man, right? Does he have an agenda?
Yeah.
You damn skippy he do. Think about why he says he's been banned from Oprah. He's not been banned. Oprah invited him in the early 90s. He refused to go for his own reasons, and he states his reasons all the time. And he's not the only one. There's a lot of other rappers that refuse to go on Oprah's show. Now he understands the reason why Oprah wanted to bring him on, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about business. It's all about money, baby. And to think that Ice Cube cares more about the black community than money, I think would be absurd.
Right.
First of all, right? You know, I know a lot of people don't like some of the sayings, but there's a lot of sayings that people had back in the day that I still live by. Although it doesn't mean that you can't help people, but you still have to understand and put things in perspective. My dad used to say the best thing you can do for poor people is not be one of them.
Right.
Right. James Evans used to say the same thing on Good Times. However, that doesn't mean that you can't go back and help, but there still has to be a means to do so. So in Ice Cube's defense, with all the money that he does make, he does invest a lot of money into charities that help the black community.
Okay.
With that said, in order to be able to do that, what do I have to continue to do? Make money.
Mm-hmm.
And these are ways that he's making money. Now, I can't go into these interviews and make statements that's going to cut off my money.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do that. He can't do a Kanye West. See, people keep forgetting that Kanye West said what he wanted to say, cost him billions, right? So at the end of the day, Ice Cube understands that. I'm not defending anything that he says or doesn't say that may not seem like it may be truthful. But understanding at the end of the day, his objective is to make money so that he can continue doing whatever it is he's doing. Mm-hmm. Not just for his family, but for the people in the black community that he does help. Mm-hmm. You gotta have money to be able to do that. He's forcing change the only way he knows how, through money.
Okay. I don't disagree with that. Anything you want to talk about specifically?
Yeah. I want to talk, well, a couple things, but the first thing I want to talk about is I just want to revisit a case. Only because of what's going on in Florida. And then when we talk about what's going on in Florida, you see the same thing was happening in Tennessee, has been happening in Tennessee, happening in Texas in terms of the educational system and the agenda as it regards to Black history and what they're teaching regarding Black history.
So all the states that you hate.
But yeah, and Texas was the first. Texas was the first. Florida and then Tennessee. And in Tennessee, the teachers union pushed back on similar agenda to what they're putting forth in Florida.
Oh, they did in Florida too.
And they're pushing back. But I just want to talk about, I just want to go back. I want to revisit a case real quick. People remember Trayvon Martin. And 2013, 2012, 2013. Right. And shame on me that I can't remember the date. That's shame on me on my
hard enough remembering the names.
But the problem is that it's so many of them. Mm-hmm. It's kind of hard. I'm still troubled that we can still remember some of the names because there's so many of them. Yeah. But 2012, 2013, I know it's in that time frame. There was another case that happened in 2010. Didn't go to trial until 2012.
Yeah, 2012.
There's a lady by the name of Marissa Alexander. Marissa Alexander was a black woman who had an abusive husband. And at one point, her and her husband were separated. She went down, got the restraining order against him, saying, had charges filed against them, the whole nine. All the things that black women don't typically do in a domestic abusive relationship, right? Mm-hmm. They don't typically follow through. Mm-hmm. They don't typically go that far because they don't want the guy to get in trouble. In most cases, they end up reconciling, which is why you end up with a high mortality rate in black domestic violence cases. Just being real. Just putting the facts out.
And most black women don't call the cops because they know what could go. It could go another way. Yeah, the possibilities of going into the system, or the possibilities of the cop showing up and killing the black man.
And if you go back any further, if they were the breadwinner, if they were the ones that were paying all the bills, taking care of the family, they're more or less likely to do that as well.
Right.
In her case, she decided that this is not what she wanted for herself. And the husband came over, banging on the door, saying he was going to kill her. She had a gun. She shot the gun off in the air in her apartment. And cops came and arrested her. Multiple charges, obviously. And she had to go on trial. Even though she was claiming stand your ground, she had to go on trial. Now, her trial initially didn't happen until either after or right during the George Zimmerman trial, after he murdered Trayvon Martin, who he was acquitted of, but we all know that he murdered. She was found guilty. Mm-hmm. Sentenced to 20 years prison. Her husband testified on her behalf and said, yeah, I was going to kill her. I told her I was going to kill her. And the only thing that scared me off was the gunshot. She saved her own life using stand your ground without killing somebody, and she goes to prison. Now, luckily, there's a smart enough group of people at the Supreme Court level, the appellate level, that decided she was right. It was really self-defense. Actually, the prosecutor wanted her to take a plea deal where they considered it self-defense, but there were some other charges he was going to be convicted of. Mm-hmm. They didn't do George Zimmerman that way. Now, we're talking about the same state. This was in Jacksonville. Zimmerman was in Sanford, I believe. But same state. He didn't get that. They didn't find him guilty of any other charges, but you want her to plead guilty to other felony charges. And we'll rule the gun part, just stand your ground, self-defense.
And that's key, because you want to agree to these felony charges.
Exactly.
That's the key part.
Hey, for all the listeners out there, this is what you got to pay attention to, is that sometimes it's not about what they're saying out front. It's the smoke screen. Mm-hmm. The fact is they wanted to have her found guilty of the felony for one primary reason.
Now you can't vote.
Can't vote. It's always going to go back to this. All right. These are ways that they control that white privilege, man. Yeah. I'm just telling you. In white America, I know you're going to get on these sites and you're going to say, okay, that's not true. We're racist with this. You're going to say all those things. Why? That's part of the privilege, man.
Black people can't be racist. Y'all kiss my ass. We ain't got the power to be racist.
That's part of your privilege, and you don't want it taken away. You don't want it to be threatened. When you hear people talk about, don't trample on my rights, don't tread on my rights, that is the privilege. You don't want us to tread or trample on your privilege. That privilege is being threatened every time you see black people on the come up. Mm-hmm. That privilege is threatened. And how do you want to fight that? You're picking your ways. And your ways now is, because you know that education is a great equalizer. It's not the only equalizer. It's not the only part of the equalizer, but it is a great opportunity to kind of equalize the playing field. Mm-hmm. You want to water down the education of black people.
Yeah.
Because black history being taught in schools, You really think white people won't pay attention to it? That's the reason why you call it Black history.
Right.
It shouldn't be Black history. It should be American history.
Right.
It should be American history. And if it's American history, teach the truth. That's what it would really. Before I shut up, Thomas Paine. Most people I don't even know what Thomas Paine is, but he was one of the, if you will, founding fathers. A lot of the pamphlets, if you watch any Revolutionary War movies, any movies relating to the Revolutionary War before it happens and even the start of it, going back to Benedict Arnold, pamphlets, reading. People would always have a pamphlet. And if they were found in possession of the pamphlet, you know what would happen to them. Any readings. Most of those pamphlets that those people were reading was written by Thomas Paine. Mm-hmm. And Thomas Paine is the one who said to the effect, if you don't dare to offend, then you can't be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So if you don't want to offend people, then you don't want to be honest. So for white America, you don't want to offend other white Americans, so you don't want to be honest. Mm-hmm. You can't be honest. You refuse to be honest because it's going to paint you in a different light. Mm-hmm. But you don't mind being honest about our history. Mm-hmm. You don't mind saying that we had violence committed against us, and then we also committed violence against others. But you didn't say anything about white America.
Yeah.
See, that's intentional. That's protecting that privilege.
Yeah, because the sentence to start off, George Washington was a U.S. president and also was a slave owner.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anything you want to talk about?
No, I was just thinking when you said that when white people feel like their privilege is under attack, they attack our civil rights.
Yeah, remember we talked about this 6 months ago, that the prime narrative is they're going to use racism as an agenda to claim that black people are being racist towards white people now, because we're pointing out the racism. So they were racist for pointing out racism.
Absolutely.
So now they the victim.
Exactly.
For sure. I have a few things I want to get to. I may not get to all of it today. I may get to it. We'll take a break next week and then we'll come back to refresh. But I'll go with this one because it is current event. So I'll just go with this current event. Attorneys reveal bombshell developments in alleged FBI conspiracy to assassinate Malcolm X. So the new allegation is a part of a multimillion-dollar federal action filed on behalf of Malcolm X's family by civil rights attorney Ben Crump. And it's notice to the federal government. Crump accuses the FBI, the CIA, and NYPD of fraudulent concealment of evidence surrounding Malcolm X's murder. Mustafa Hassan, who was a security for Brother Malcolm, told reporters that, the New York City police officers tried to prevent Malcolm X's camp from restraining the person who they
thought was the shooter,
and which turned out to be Talmadge Hayer. And the only reason why he was caught because somebody actually shot him in the leg as he was fleeing the scene. But when they came outside and the mob of Malcolm X's people had him, was beating him up, the police department said, "Is he one of ours? Are you one of ours?" Is one of the things that they want to know. So, and then they never got a testimony from the security guard who was there. We know that it is believed to be that CIA and the FBI had a part in Malcolm X's assassination. This has been the conspiracy since day one.
One of the conspiracies.
Yeah, and then you also had two of the people who were arrested were eventually not really exonerated, but after they were released, they were actually compensated, knowing that they were not guilty. Aziz and Islam. I think at the time they had different names, Bryant and Butler, right? Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson. But they knew that the FBI was watching the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X for a long time. The NYPD had their own special unit that they called BALSI, which was the Bureau of Special Services Investigations. And at every demonstration or every speech that the Malcolm X was giving or that the NOI was giving, they were there filming it or recording it or just there spectating, trying to see what it is that they were going to say. Malcolm X would even tell them, all the people who came to listen to me, just want you to know that there are some agents in here and welcome them as well to come listen to us speak and tell the truth. There was a telegram written by Hoover that said that we need to do something about Malcolm X. They had all of this surveillance, wiretaps of all of the NOI in the house, in the houses, in the cars. But yet they weren't able to find out who Malcolm X's killers were or the conspiracy to kill Malcolm. So if you say it was the Nation of Islam, if you say it was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and you have all of them tapped, you've heard some conversations to know that something was happening. And his house was firebombed a week earlier, and there's no security there other than Malcolm's own security. So just to put this in perspective for the people trying to figure out what I'm saying, if you're at every demonstration, at every speech, you're tailing Malcolm, you're watching Malcolm. Even when he go across seas, you're watching Malcolm. But on the day he's assassinated, we can't find a police in sight. Then you quickly arrest 3 people. One that they knew was one of the shooters. He got shot. The crowd beat him up. Malcolm X, they knew Hare was one of the shooters. But the other 2, the one that you knew was the shooter told you, they weren't part of the original 5. They weren't there. They were not the shooters, but yet you convict them, you sentence them, you do everything fairly quickly. You don't even put your attention on anybody else. And then in the ballroom, you clean it up with the bullet hole still in the wall, and you still have a dance a few hours later in the ballroom. So they never really secured the crime scene of Brother Malcolm.
That's right.
The NYPD knew that they were looking for 5 shooters, 5 killers. They knew that they were looking for 5 killers, but yet they only arrested 3. And it was later on in the affidavit, I think it was the late 70s, 1977, when Hare said that he gave him the names of the other people involved, and they never investigated it. No. Never investigated, right? So
why do you think that is?
Hold on, just 1 second. So they knew that at the time of the shooting, because I know you don't know, you might not know much about the story, right? I know Dad do.
I'll just Godfather Harlem this.
9 informants were in the ballroom the day Malcolm was assassinated. One of them being one of his head of security people. So if 9 informants of the police department, whether they FBI or the NYPD, you would think that they saw what happened, right? Mm-hmm. But yet you arrest 2 of the wrong people, and the other 4 are never convicted, arrested, or even looked into. One of the informants that they believe was in the NOI. I know to the brothers listening, listen, this is just off of research because I know how the Nation of Islam is. They believe that John Ali wasn't an informant. Even before he even joined the Nation of Islam, they believed John Ali was an informant, who was the national secretary for the Nation of Islam and one of the closest people to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Even J. Edgar Hoover said himself that we have at least 4 informants at the top of the Nation of Islam.
That's right.
So, and then after Malcolm was basically suspended for speaking on the JFK assassination, as he wasn't supposed to, because during the NOI times, he was supposed to be more religious and not political. And that was a political statement that he made. And the FBI agitated and instigated the beef between Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. The officers told people that we was going to the news pamphlets and telling them this how Honorable Elijah Muhammad feel about Malcolm, this how Malcolm feel, and they were playing both sides trying to get them at war because they thought Malcolm was a threat inside of the NOI. But what they didn't know is that Malcolm was more of a threat outside of the NOI, right, because he no longer had to just talk religiously, he could talk politically. And even with that, they even tried to make Malcolm an informant. They went to Malcolm and asked him about information within the NOI, and they even tried to say that they was going to compensate him some money because Malcolm was broke. Malcolm was broke. All of his stuff was paid for by the NOI, so he had no real money to his name. Mm-hmm. And He told them, "You must insult my intelligence, and no government agency can ever expect any information out of me." And when you look at this in totality, I believe that his family has a case that even if the NYPD and the FBI weren't the shooters or paid the shooters or was in some kind of combination with the shooters, they knew something happened.
They knew about it.
You got anything about that?
It's the same. The same thing's true in Martin Luther King's assassination. They had wiretaps. They knew everything that was going on, all the conversations Martin Luther King was having regarding protests, speeches, what the content of the speech was going to be, the location of the speech. Mm-hmm. They had wiretaps. They had all that same information. And again, same situation where you obviously end up with one shooter that they're saying was the one that was responsible for shooting Martin Luther King, but did not have the mentality to be able to arrange something like that, let alone make it happen on his own.
Right.
JFK, same situation. Anybody that was outspoken against white America and threatening that privilege, they assassinated. Mm-hmm. And yes, in most cases, they even use black people to do it. Mm-hmm. And no different than they did in the times of slavery and using other blacks. In fact, the slave capturers use blacks to capture other Africans. That was part of the deal. So it always is. That's how it happens. They're going to use the people that are closest to you to get you.
Yeah, and then Gene Roberts, who was one of the informants for the NYPD, that the rest of the NYP didn't even know was an informant. The prosecution didn't even know he was an informant. They never named his name. He was there when they assassinated Malcolm, and he was the one that performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on him and tried to do CPR on him. And he said the one of the things that his superiors asked him is, "Why did you do that? That's not your job to try to perform CPR on Malcolm X."
Because we wanted that nigga dead.
They wanted him dead. They wanted him dead.
Well, hey, anything else? It's a whole lot. There's a lot of conspiracy theories, but at the end of the day, the most important part is knowing that NYPD should have known about it. The FBI knew about it. The CIA knew about it. Which one was actually responsible for assassinating is really irrelevant.
Right.
At the end of the day, we know that the people that are supposed to serve and protect did not.
Yeah.
In fact, they helped orchestrate an assassination.
Yeah.
And and again, what would be the reason for the assassination? Because for the listeners, especially the new listeners and the racist listeners, what would be the reason to assassinate Malcolm X? What would be the reason to assassinate Martin Luther King? What would be the reason to assassinate JFK? What would be the reason?
It's what's going to happen next is the
threatening that white privilege.
Yeah.
Can't have it. Not having it. Not having it.
Right. Anything else you want to talk about?
Just one thing, man.
Go ahead.
I know people that listen to this podcast. In fact, Bake told me somebody said, "It's 2023, sir." Yes, it is. And we're not far from 1965.
At all.
We're not far from 1923. So at the end of the day, we know that history has the uncanny ability to repeat itself. Mm-hmm. The unfortunate part is if we don't get the true story about history, we can't be prepared for it to repeat itself. Mm-hmm. Which obviously I think is what white America wants. They don't want us to be prepared. They don't want us to be prepared for the revolution. They don't want us to be prepared. Education is the key to be prepared for the revolution and anything else that may happen so that it doesn't repeat, but so that we can be better as a people, better as a country. So we got to continue to fight for the truth of history because truth personifies history the same way history personifies truth. So we have to have that. And it's up to us to make sure that it happens. We got to continue to fight. We like red tails. We fight. We got to continue to fight. Continue to fight. And you do that by educating yourselves, registering to vote, voting. It's important. Your vote does count. And I'm not just talking about the big election. I'm just not talking about president. I'm talking about the local elections. The local elections are things that are going to immediately impact you and your family, your community, your finances, your property. Your local voting is just as important, if not more so, than voting at the federal level, the national level.
The problem with that is most black people don't even know when the local elections are.
Tell you what, when people want to know, hit us up on Facebook. If you don't know, hit us up on Facebook or when local elections are happening, especially in Bedford, Lynchburg, Roanoke, surrounding areas. You hit us up, we'll get you the information when the local elections are happening.
As soon as your kid turn 18, have them go see Miss Sandra Lewig here in Bedford because she registers people to vote.
That's right. That's what you got to do. And we here to help. So we're not only up here propagating, we up here, we take action. Yeah. You want our help, we're here to help.
Absolutely.
And also, let us know where you live and where you have to travel to vote, because that's important too.
Absolutely.
One last thing I have to talk about, and then we'll see y'all in a couple of weeks. And since we already went there, you went there with Dr. King, you brought it up, so let's just go to Dr. King for a second. At the time of Dr. King's death, he was one of the most hated men in America. And they did a poll about 75% of the American people disapproved of Dr. King. And then after he died, more than half the country said that he deserved what he got. The reason is because of 1967, 1968. We talked about this a lot on this podcast, how most people don't talk about Dr. King after 1965.
After that, I had a dream speech.
After I have a dream speech, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Well, that's mainly because in school, that's where it stopped.
Yeah, right. So I have a dream speech. So you think,
pretty much that's what it is. I have a dream, and then he died.
Yeah, right. And then most politicians quote Dr. King, as we talked about on this podcast, judge somebody by the content of their character instead of their skin. We've seen a number of politicians use Dr. King's quotes without fully quoting them.
That's right.
So I'm gonna just go through some Dr. King quotes that probably he said from 1967, 1968. Let's just start with racism. Whites, it must be frankly said, and not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. Let me go back and say that again.
That's right.
Whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn. That's Dr. King, y'all. If y'all want to, in February, when you want to quote Dr. King, I want you to throw that in there for me. Let's go back to the national anthem. In the days ahead, we must not consider it unpatriotic to raise certain basic questions about our national character. Let's talk about the riots. Yet the average white person also has a responsibility. He has to resist the impulse to seize upon the rioter as the exclusive villain. He has to rise up with indignation against his own municipal, state, and national governments to demand that the necessary reforms be instituted, which alone will protect him. If he reserves his resentment only for the Negro, he will be the victim by allowing those who have the greatest culpability to evade responsibility. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention.
That was 1968. That's 1968. For the people that say this is 2023, tell me that doesn't apply in 2023.
Let's go to the schools. I wept for my children and all black children who have been denied a knowledge of their heritage. I wept for all of the white children who thought their daily miseducation or taught that the Negro is an irrelevant entity in American society. I wept for all of the white people and teachers who are forced to overlook the fact that the wealth of cultural and technological progress in America is a result of the Commonwealth of pouring contributions. Let's go to another one. Let's go to deflecting when it comes to racism. Now, however, unpleasant that sounds, it is the truth. And we will never solve the problem of racism until there is a recognition of the fact that racism still stands at the center of so much of our nation. We must see racism for what it is. Now, here's a part y'all don't know. I'm going to just say the quote, but I'll tell you what the quote is about. The problem of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a racial redistribution of political and economic power. Sound like reparations to me. That's systematic racism. White Americans must recognize that justice for black people cannot be achieved without radical changes in the structure of our society. And I say the last one for black people. Now, the other thing we'll have to do is this. Always anchor our external direct action with the power of economic withdrawal. Now we are poor people. Individually, we are poor. When you compare us with the white society in America, we are poor. Never stop and forget that collectively, that means all of us together. Collectively, we are richer than all the nations of the world, with the exception of 9. Do you ever think about that? After you leave the US, Soviet, Russia, Great Britain, West Germany, France, and I can name the others, the Negro collectively is richer than most nations of the world. We have an annual income of more than $30 billion a year, which is more than all of the exports of the United States and more than the national budget of Canada. Did you know that? That's power right there, if we know how to pull it. And after 1967, let's just put this into some perspective. In 1967, let's go back. After 1965, after the Voting Rights Act passed, Dr. King said, we're in a new phase.
That's right.
We're in a new era. And that new era is talking about the economic things of this country. The 3 viruses, racism, economics, and militarism. Those are the 3 viruses that he talked about. Mm-hmm. And one of the key things that changed his mentality is when he went to Chicago. Because as Dad said plenty of times on this podcast, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act was giving black people something that they already had. It wasn't going to cost America. That's right. And Dr. King said, what's coming next in this new era is going to cost America. And when he went to Chicago, he began to look at the ghettos. He looked at the poverty. He looked at places that said, there's no economic development here. No wonder y'all are pissed off. That's right. And when they went marching, he encountered thousands of racist people in Chicago that he never had witnessed or had to deal with in the South. And what they did was they did an experiment. They took the white people from their organization and have them go in and try to get a home loan. And they said, yeah, we got places over here you can buy, places over here you can buy. And then when they went out, a black person went in after them. They said, oh, we ain't got nothing. You have all of these places in the ghetto where black people are living in these housing, because we know urban renewal happened. Living in this housing where the water's not working, the heat's not working, and you expect black people to pick themselves up by the bootstraps, and they have no economic development. And then the riots happened in 1967, the ones in Watts and the ones in New Jersey and in Harlem. And those riots, Dr. King said, those riots had absolutely nothing to do with just race. It was about the lack of economic opportunity for black people. It was about the poverty and the stuff that was going on in the ghetto. And then he became the most hated person in the country because he started speaking out against the Vietnam War. And what he said about the Vietnam War was, you're fighting a war in a country, giving millions and millions of dollars for something you can't even explain to us why we're fighting in. Right. And yet you got a war going on in your backyard with people who are starving. People are living in housing with no water and no heat, and you're doing absolutely nothing about it. But you could put guns in black people's hands. You could put bombs in black people's hands and tell them go over there and kill somebody, but they can't get a home loan. That's right. They can't get a business loan. They can't get the proper funding to have proper housing in their own community. And that's what got Dr. King murdered. We got to start, as you talked about, what got him murdered. The assassination didn't happen in 1963. when he was fighting for something that we already had.
That's right.
Assassination didn't happen in 1964. It happened in 1968 when he started talking about the economic things. Not only was he killed, his brother was killed a year later. Most people don't know that.
That's right.
His brother was killed, found dead in a swimming pool with no water in his lungs. And his wife said he was an expert swimmer. Never investigated. So when we begin, and his mother was, of course, killed 6 years later in our church by a Hebrew Israelite who went in there and killed her and said he killed her because the Christianity that they was believing in wasn't correct. But when you begin to look at this in totality, at what Dr. King represented it, it's not what y'all show on them damn documentaries in February. So just go back and look at who the real Dr. King was, and make sure y'all don't just quote my brother halfway. Make sure you put all the quotes in the context.
You won't learn this in school. So I hope parents, I hope kids that are listening document these type of things so that this information doesn't get lost in the educational system. That's my fear, is that a lot of this information is going to get lost.
Absolutely. Anything last thing you want to say? No. All right. We appreciate y'all. We love y'all. We'll see y'all in a couple weeks.